Hey guys, thanks for tuning in for another Med Doc Talks. If you don't know, I'm Dr. Kyle Booth, and this is.
Dr. Zach Couples, we're excited to have you on board.
All right, so today, if you saw in the topics, it is going to be why does it hurt when I reach overhead? Why does it hurt when I reach overhead? It's a good question. There's a lot of things that go into that question. It's a pretty loaded question. So we're going to try to break down a little bit more of what could go into it, and some of the give you a little bit of background on maybe a methodology of starting to treat and trying to get yourself to a higher functioning level.
I can dig it. So, in order to understand why you might hurt, well, the number of causes could be many. From a movement standpoint, what we have to look at is all of the individual parts of your body that go into you successfully raising your arm overhead without issues.
We'll look at a couple of these are the most common things that we generally evaluate with someone that comes in with shoulder pain. We want to look at a couple of different regions that aren't necessarily just here, because this is where pain is, but we always want to make sure that we're evaluating other areas than just the painful areas. So I'm going to have Zach flip around so he can kind of show us right down the middle. We're looking at the spine. So the spine is the center of our body, and we'll kind of move out towards the shoulder to get a little bit better understanding of all the complexes that go into the shoulder. So the spine, what it does dictates what the rest of the body does. So we have the spine here. What attaches to the spine? I don't know if you guys knew this, but there are ribs that go from the base of your neck all the way down to the top of your low back. So these wrap around to the front and they attach to our sternum in the front. That is the surface of which your shoulder blade slides and glides on. So it can go back and forth and go up and down, but it has to have a pretty good surface for it to slide on. That's where our rib cage is. So our rib cage, very important for making a nice, stable surface for our next anatomy area is our shoulder blade, our scapula. It's a big wide bone, but it slides and glides over the rib cage itself. And then in the front, so we're turning this way, we got right on the ridge of the collar, our collarbone or our clavicle. So it goes from the sternum as well out towards the tip of the shoulder. The shoulder blade and the clavicle, they meet up. And they have like a little connection there, a little joint. And then lastly, what we would look at is the actual humerus. So the arm bone, looking at the bicep, boom.
Bam.
Got a bicep going there. But that's the humerus. So the humerus is the arm bone, which kind of completes these things that we would look at. If you're looking at the full kinetic chain or the rest of the things that we want to look at, we could go all the way out to the fingertips, but those are the main things that we want to look at for anatomy of the shoulder.
In order for us to be able to use our shoulder and coordinate all of those areas together so you can go overhead pain-free, it sounds a little scary, but we'll keep it simple for you. The big keys is we want to make sure, as Kyle talked about, is that your shoulder blade stays up against the rib cage as much as possible as you go overhead. If your shoulder blade can't do that, some of the muscles locally in the shoulder can get stressed and cranky and lead to some issues. Your shoulder blade, if you look from the side view, if my hand was the shoulder blade, it is shaped like a bowl. Mm-hmm. And so you want to be able to fill that bowl with the rib cage. So as we'll talk about later, being able to improve your rib cage mobility can be really useful for going overhead. Now let's talk about what it takes to complete this action. All of those areas have to sequence together, but it's pretty simple. If you hurt at certain parts of going overhead, we can pinpoint the exact areas that might be problematic. So in the beginning phases of raising overhead, it's going to be more arm action involved. And your shoulder blade is going to be sitting in a certain angle. If you have discomfort early on in that arc of going overhead, what we may address is things more in the mid to lower parts of your rib cage and spine. Once we go into the mid ranges of going overhead, so it hurts like that 90 degrees, that might be more the upper parts of the spine to look into. or certain parts of your shoulder muscles, mostly on the back side. And then as we go completing overhead, we might look at more muscles and tissues that are on either the front side of the collarbone or the uppermost parts of the upper back and ribs. And we will give you activities to address all of those areas depending on when you feel the pinch or discomfort as you go overhead.
Yeah, looking at sequencing is big. And a lot of times people don't really understand like what needs to happen to complete a movement. And there can be things that really get dissected from an evaluation that really help the patient understand, hey, this is the one spot that might be a kink in the chain of your full movement. So if one of those little or those bones or those areas that we talked about aren't doing its job, that's when we get into trouble, and one part starts compensating and trying to do too much. So that's when we get those cranky, those cranky muscles, cranky tendons.
In regards to when we're talking about when you get the pinch or when it becomes uncomfortable, really you only have to look at two main areas, even if you don't know the anatomy as well as we might. But hey, that's why they pay us the big bucks. You either are going to improve the mobility of stuff on the front side of your body or stuff on the back side of your body, which you can tell by my reach, I might need a little bit of both. Most of the muscles of your shoulder and all of the things that function as you go overhead are either on the front or the back. So if we go back to those three arcs of going overhead, in the lower parts, it hurts like as soon as I start to lift up. We're looking at improving stretching stuff on the back side of the body. If it's in the mid-ranges, we're probably going to look at improving mobility of stuff on the front side of your body, so your pecs or anything like that. And then when you're going fully overhead, it's about combining both of those motions or both of those areas, improving their motion in order to make you successful and pain-free doing so.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot to look at there. Try not to get into the intricacies of naming muscles and naming all these things, because that just gets people really confused. But having a general idea of things in the front, things in the back with certain movements, that's what the typical evaluation will go through, and identifying some of those things. Looking at where to start. So looking at either front or back. I'll speak a little bit more about the types of interventions for rehab. So when we look at what's called a closed chain or an open chain, these are terms that can help you understand the complexity of a movement and how hard it is to make that stuff happen. So a closed chain, we're going to look at these dumbbells here. We're going to demonstrate what's first an open chain. So the weight or the resistance and the thing that's holding it is actually moving. So it's going through motion. It's changing its position, and relative to myself or my body, it's not moving. It's staying in the same spot. So that's what's called an open chain. So we're just defining these first. We'll go into what's going to help a little bit easier after we define them. Closed chain is the hand or whatever is holding the resistance or withstanding the resistance stays put, and the body moves around it. So if my hands are here and I'm squatting down, the hands stay in the same spot and my body is actually moving. So closed chain versus open chain. Typically, I like to start patients with closed chain movements because that helps them understand how to stabilize, and then they don't have to balance weights. They don't have to move things a little bit more in this scary position. They feel a little bit more confident with a closed chain position. That also compresses the joint and it makes it a little bit more sturdier, stable.
To piggyback on what you said, Kyle, if we're thinking about exercises you might do in the gym to get your shoulders strong, anything that's more open chain would be any type of press. So if you're doing a bench press, if you're doing an overhead press, if you're doing an incline-decline press, those would be more open chain. A lot of times those will be more uncomfortable than something like a closed chain exercise, which would be a push-up, incline or decline. When you go to reach out and get something from the cupboard, that would be considered open chain. Well, that's the thing that hurts. So if we can find ways to use the principles of closed chain to make that more comfortable, you might actually be able to go back to that move and feel really good.
Yeah, finding that entry point, finding a low level of hardness, or making it really easy, making that entry point, and you can start building a little bit more resiliency. That's what rehab should truly look like. It should be the hardest thing that you do well.
Carries. So
Yeah. So when we talked about like a carry, it's kind of distracting a joint. So a carry would be, if I'm holding this weight, and let's just imagine it's like really, really heavy. It's not a 10-pound weight, and gravity's just pulling this down. So it's opening the actual joint at the shoulder. That's called a distractive force. And then if we're doing closed chain, say we were doing that push or that press that Zach was talking about, now gravity's pushing my joints together. So I'm here, I'm into a push-up, and the arm bone is getting pushed up into the socket of the shoulder. That is a closed chain. So those are two different stimuluses there that we're looking to attain there. When we look at a closed chain, looking to make reaching overhead easier. So when we talked about figuring out an entry point, I'm going to use this bench here to show you a really easy entry point for a lot of people with the shoulder going overhead position. So if we can get into a position where we are now closed chain, right? Because the arm and the hand are the hand is going to stay in the same spot, and my body is now going to be moving. So if I get to here and I start sinking back, now my arm and hand are now going up over my head. That looks very similar to reaching up over my head. So we're doing it in a little bit more comfortable position for the patient, and they can stop and they can dictate when they stop going up overhead. It's like, oh, that might be a little bit too painful. Now we have a range of motion that we're starting to work on, and we're going to continue to see if we can get more and more range of motion out of that. But it's in a little bit more comfortable position for them. So that's our closed chain position, and trying to get the first beginnings of our overhead movement going. And then trying to load the shoulder, trying to put a ton of load on the shoulder, meaning using a weight that's going to challenge the shoulder, but it doesn't put it in a threatening position. Very, very important for creating stability and confidence in the shoulder. Again, imagine if this is 100 pounds and I'm holding it with one hand. Now I have to stack my shoulder, make sure that it's not just going to fall and be a limp noodle here, but there's still a lot of tension going through the shoulder. So this is a really good one for stimulating more healing, more circulation, all the things that are good for healing in the body with just holding a weight down by our side. It doesn't have to look like the thing that hurts. The thing that hurts, we're going to have to avoid for a little bit, and we're going to have to figure out different strategies for that.
when you hear something like when we talk about compression or the joint getting close together or the joints getting pulled apart, neither of those are good or bad unto themselves, because kind of sometimes when you hear compression, especially when you hear it from a doctor or someone, it's scary. But it's actually a normal part of having healthy joints. In order to keep the cartilage in your joints healthy, which are those surfaces that slide and glide up against one another, you have to have some degree of compression and then space apart. So all we're trying to do is restore that relationship in the joints in your body to promote healing and to reduce pain and sensitivity. Now, let's look into stretching stuff on the front and stuff on the back. If you are someone who has that discomfort, that nastiness in the early parts of going overhead, this move's for you. What you'll want to do, and we could just stay in the quadruped position just like Kyle was before when he was rocked back going like so. You can create a stretch in the parts that need it if it's in those early phases of going overhead by simply doing your classic child's pose. Or as I like to call this one, the lazy child's pose, or the child's pose where the kid's in trouble. So all you're going to do is rock your head down like this. You want to make sure you're not bending like you're doing a crunch, but you just want to rock your chest over your thighs, let your shoulders slump, and then you're just going to breathe in this position nice and easy.
He's getting his shoulder blades are kind of coming down to the side, and again, opening that up. With each breath, he's trying to expand as much as he can back there, so that gets a lot more freedoms through there.
As you're breathing, make sure you get a full exhale so you feel a little bit of ab tension, and then slow, silent inhale through the nose so you get that stretch in your upper back. If you've done that and it's better, or you're someone who hurts kind of at that mid-range instead, you might, instead of going here, get into this type of position. This, even though you're going to work with stuff on the front, based on the way you're going to be breathing during this activity, it will actually stretch and improve range of motion in the front of the chest. And it's also a good way to set yourself up for a push-up in the future. So with that, you want to tuck your hips underneath you. Think about you're a dog tucking your tail between your legs. Push your chest away from the ground without crunching. Right? We don't want that because that's not going to get the stretches needed in the front side of the body. Chest stays parallel to the ground. You could do the same breaths. If you wanted to kick it up a notch, because that's easy, go to one hand. And then you can alternate sides, which will increase the good, healthy compression into the joint that we want. And then the last bit of sauce you could do, if you're just hurting, then you want that last little bit of overhead. You could get in this position. You could do what Kyle did right here, which I think is really good, making sure you wrap the elbows in. If you really wanted to isolate it to one side, I like this move. It's called a reach, roll, and lift. You're going to get in this rock back position with your rear touching your heels. You're going to rest on your forearms. Push your chest away. Again, it's a broken record without crunching. Push up here. Then what you're going to do is you're going to turn your palm up like you're asking for money. Kyle, please. Bend your elbow a little bit, flex the bicep, and then you're going to slide your elbow forward and breathe in that position, and you'll feel a really nasty stretch right underneath your shoulder blade. But that's going to loosen up some of the stuff you need to complete the full overhead action. And we're going through this fast, but don't worry, we're going to have this video on our website, so you'll have the individual exercises to go along with it. But those are a lot of our key moves that we use with our clients to get overhead.
And that's just beginning to get that overhead. When you build resilience, yes, we're going to try to get you moving some weights again and doing those things, but we got to restore that range of motion first. If you come in and you just can't lift the arm up over the head without pain, first thing we got to get back range of motion. We got to get that function back. Once you do start putting weights back into your hand, or you're starting to kind of go back overhead with even just a reach, a good cue for a lot of my patients is hand positioning. So if you think about this chain of bones that go from the fingertips all the way down to the spine that we were talking about. So we had the arm bone, we had the shoulder, we had the collarbone, we had the ribs, and we had the spine. By changing our hand position, we can make a lot of things different when we're going through movement. So if you have pain and you're reaching up and say the thumb is on top of the hand, so it's up like this, try a different strategy. We can always just turn the palm over and then do this and see if that actually creates better mechanics or less pain in the shoulder. So changing the hand position is really, really paramount for making big change in the whole sequence of movement. So just first, if you have nothing else that you want to do to change, just change hand position and see what it does to the rest of your shoulder complex and the pain that's going on with that stuff, because it can make a pretty big difference. It's not always the answer, of course it's not, but it can definitely make a big sequence difference.
And a lot of times, and I always laugh when I see this, if you're lifting with your hand down or your thumb down, that's a little bit more restrictive and compromising position for the shoulder. And a lot of times I'll have patients come in, they'll say, Zach, it hurts when I do this. And it's like, well, why are you lifting anything that way? First off, but they don't know that, so I get it. So to echo what Kyle's saying, anytime you can go Siskel and Ebert thumbs up, or I want to, hand out, so to speak, that's usually more comfortable than if you're going palms down or thumbs down.
Yeah, it just puts us, kind of twists the shoulder to where it gets locked into place, and then we can't do too much with it. But if you can change the hand position even slightly, it doesn't have to be like full turn, just slightly retest, give it another shot, and see what kind of results you get. Those are the things that can really be really helpful.
Let's talk about some training modifications, because even though your shoulder may hurt, you can still do some things in the gym, whether it's at your home gym or You're training at a place like Elevate after the apocalypse is done. So if it hurts to go overhead, an easy fix would be to utilize an incline press variation of any type. It's just going to take you out of your end range position that's uncomfortable, and you'll still be able to get a training effect. Don't be afraid to go with a really low incline. You want to find the height that is good enough that you can press weights overhead, but it's not painful. A lot of times what I've found too is if you can't do it on an incline, sometimes doing a flat bench can also be uncomfortable, and a lot of times it's due to the setup. Because when we set up for a big bench press, you want to move big weight,
Like
press your friends.
Like that.
You pull the shoulder blades down and back to create a stable base of support to press from. But that can limit the overhead motion that we need, or the movements of the shoulder blade and other things in the shoulder complex. So a lot of times it's actually better if you can't incline to do a decline press. And an easy way you can do that is by simply spin move. Boom. Starting in a position where you're on your back, knees bent, you can just simply curl your hips up so your rear is higher than your rib cage or your torso, and that's going to create a little bit of an incline, or a decline, I should say, as you perform a press. That works really well.
And so just looking at a flat, so if you was flat, this is going to go perpendicular to the torso. And then when the torso's up a little bit, now it closes that angle down a little bit. That's called a decline. So just knowing that, if you see a bench in the gym and it looks like it's slanting down, that's usually used for a decline press.
And it's usually way more comfortable. It's comfortable for most people to do that.
Yeah, and you can usually push more weight. So if you're trying to get as big as Z cup over here, use the decline. Gets you buff.
Yes, I hope you have higher aspirations than that, though. My God. The last thing we would recommend is if you still want to do some movements with your arms, whether it's pushing or pulling, it's a lot of times easier if you do them in sitting. As we talked about before, the spine and your ribs and a lot of other body regions have to move as you go overhead. But that also means that you can cheat through a lot of those regions when you're doing something like an overhead motion. If you ever see someone at the gym and they're doing their overhead press, they got their weight set up and they go, they arch their back and then press that way. They're not really overhead pressing, they're cheating to do that, and that can restrict movement in your shoulder, potentially lead to some discomfort if you're already hurting. If you sit, especially if you got your back supported, that minimizes the amount of ways that you can cheat the moves, and is going to load the shoulders and upper body musculature in a healthy manner. So sit if you're doing landmine presses or anything overhead, or even if you got some cable systems, sitting generally makes things go better.
Simplifies things. Simplify, especially if you're worried about the movement causing pain. Try to simplify and make it more things supported, and so you can really focus on the movement at hand, the stuff that you're really trying to accomplish. So I like it, keeping it simple, having the options of hand positioning, and then also incorporating an incline or a decline to change the position where your arm is actually pressing away from your body. So if it is truly trying to be in an overhead position, support yourself to make it easy, and then see if we can make that overhead position doable and trainable. If you guys have any questions, again, leave them in the comments. Me and Zach will address them as quickly as we can and as much thoroughness as we can.
Yes.
And then for next week, be sure to tune in. We're going to have another episode on Wednesday, 2 o'clock, for our episodes of Doc Talks.
Well, rock on. Thank you all for tuning in. You've been amazing, and we'll see you next time.
All right, see you guys.